G'day everybody, this is Scott from Social Media Mastery, and thank you again for being a part of this video, for tuning in. I'm here with Sade, who I met when I first saw her on stage. I couldn't talk to her that day because she was just surrounded by the fans. It was just amazing sharing the stage with, with a billionaire, and, kind of just like watching the crowd reaction is something that really got me going. Just like watching how everybody put their phones down, everybody sort of tuned in and listened. Every head was basically pointing up. And to me, that was something like really special. So basically, just to introduce Sade, as a member of the esteemed Forbes Coaches Council, mindset specialist and award-winning leadership strategist featured on TED and TEDx, Sade is recognized for her ability to translate neuroscience and psychology research into practical, actionable strategies to accelerate success. And this is something that I've got to see firsthand, basically seeing Sade on stage, and everybody, like no matter who they are, whether they're kind of like more spiritual, more kind of sciencey, or whether they're doing really well in life, or they're just sort of trying to survive, that Sade really has like a message for everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I know we were talking about it for some time, so it's great to finally be able to be here and to share with your audience.
Yeah, because I think like when I was on the phone to you, like what really kind of what I was like telling you kind of like really struck me about you is that not only do you like really know your stuff, which is great, but you are like your own source, as in like no matter what's going on around you, like the same as like with like say Dr. Wayne Dyer, and like people that basically kind of they have something within them that it almost doesn't matter what's going around them. It's an opportunity to do better, not a lecture to tell people they have to do better, but more of like an inspirational opportunity to say like whether it's kind of like is a win for you for this week that you just survived, which is great, or did you aim higher? And this is something that it's there's distinctions that really hit me as like really special, because sometimes like a motivational message will come out and it just lands wrong. It's just like rainbow blasting, like everybody cheer up, and your message is not like that. Another one is kind of like just accept life and put up with it. And again, your message is not like that, but it has the positives of both sides, of both the negative and sort of more realistic psychologies. Like, as we were saying, it's very practical. What I found is that the stuff that you were talking to us about, it's up to date, it's inspirational, and it has like a story attached to it as well. So I'm just really excited to interview you today, hear your story, hear your framework, and just basically just like see what happens. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And what beautiful words you've just shared. I'm really pleased that it's coming across in the right way.
Yeah.
But it's actually just on that. It's really interesting because you're so right. I think we do see especially now when there's so much uncertainty and people are scrambling to make sense of what's happening and not knowing what is going to happen in the future and becoming okay with that. You do get one sort of school of thought, which is you need to change. This is your time. Do what you can, push through, be great, achieve amazing things. And I think for the right people, that's a great kind of message. But for a lot of people who are just trying to find their feet and just trying to get the motivation to wake up every morning, that can actually be really dangerous. And I think, to your point, having the psychology background gives you an appreciation and a sensitivity for the fact that everyone is on different journeys and at different stages of their journey. And so having the self-compassion and the guidance and, I sense it, or I see it as being really empowering rather than telling people you should be this, you ought to be that, because that language we know is not actually helpful. Giving them opportunities to forge their own path, however that looks for them, and being really self-compassionate in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, what would you say, what are people going through these days besides like, apparently in Australia, we don't call it COVID, we call it the current situation.
Yes.
Apparently it's our slang because we have slang for everything. What are people going through at the moment, and what do you feel that they need to hear?
Yeah, so with the current situation, which in a way, I kind of think it's a good way to view it because it isn't limited to a health crisis. In Australia, we're so fortunate that we have been protected to an extent. We've had relatively low numbers when you compare it to globally. And we had a government that implemented restrictions, early enough to capture it and to really flatten the curve. So that the health implications are not so great. People don't necessarily have that fear anymore around getting sick and potentially being in hospital and dying. But it's all the other stuff that plays on us. The job insecurity, the fact that a lot of people have been let go, the uncertainty around what the future looks like, the impact of certain industries, the impact of the economy, not only in Australia, but actually globally. And these things are really big picture problems, a lot of which we don't have any control over. But what I'm seeing is a lot of us, we become very consumed by that uncertainty, and we know we don't have control over it, but it's a weight that we carry with us every single morning. What's going to happen? And so often one of two things happen. Well, actually one of three things. People feel stuck, like they're completely in limbo. They don't know if they can make plans because, who knows what the next month is going to hold. So there's this feeling of just not knowing, which can be very frustrating. There's a feeling of feeling completely overwhelmed. This is all too much. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to turn to. And that's when mental health can become a real challenge.
Yep.
Feelings of loneliness, anxiety, etc. And then the other side is you've also got people who see this as a time. Well, actually, there's probably, they branch into two. People who see this as a wonderful opportunity to reset, to reflect, to do what they can to really take control. We call them the realistic optimists.
Yes.
And then that can, though, veer onto the doer, what is it? We call them the doer deniers, who say, yes, okay, there's uncertainty, but I'm going to keep pushing, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And they almost push themselves beyond the point of burnout because they feel like that's their coping mechanism. And they tell other people to do that. And some leaders and companies will adopt that as a way to manage this time. They're pushing their teams, keep going, it's business as usual. We can still do what we need to do. But that's not taking into account that we're in a very different world. It's not business as usual, it's business as unusual. And we need to acknowledge that. So that's definitely what we're seeing and what people are feeling. So it's a spectrum. You've got people with intense amount of gratitude for the opportunity, people who are in denial a little bit and still trying to push themselves in a dangerous way, people who are suffering from loneliness and anxiety and the overwhelm, and then people who just feel really stuck and frustrated. And you can go through all of them in a single day. So we're not fixed in what we experience in terms of emotionally and our approach to life.
Absolutely. And so it makes a lot of sense. It's like that whole, seize the day, carpe diem, or whatever it is, that yes, you can, moving through, basically blasting through all the obstacles. There is good in there, but then as you were saying, it can be, maybe it's in the delivery, maybe it's kind of because the novel coronavirus, it is novel, but not just the virus itself. Our response to it is new. We haven't seen this before in our lifetimes. Factors like, are people suffering from, is it health or health concerns, money or money concerns, or a secondary or tertiary issue, such as, what if somebody is otherwise doing really well in life, but the people around them are suffering so much from either money or economic concerns that then affects them as well. So in a way, we're all touched, we're all affected by this, and coping at different levels as well. One of the key issues, what I love is what you point out, is that this, it's not that simple. When somebody says seize the day, or let's achieve more, the two answers people tend to have is is this a good message or is this a bad message? And in a way, what we're saying is hang on, that's a soundbite. Politicians will often use a 3-word slogan. It's word 1, 2, 3, and that's how they get elected, perhaps. Because it's kind of are you going for team left or team right? Whereas what you're talking about in a way is, it's not so much which side are you going to vote, or it's something kind of that needs to be processed. It's a conversation that really cannot fit into a half or so, a 30-second soundbite. It's something that needs to be you can have a hook to get people in, and there's a framework that I like to call the anti-steps versus the steps, where we often we kind of go, are you doing X, Y, Z, and you find it's not working, but instead you need to do the steps, which is this, and that. But this is in a way almost a conversation that we're developing as we go. Because we do have amazing frameworks. It's how to get more money, how to get more health, how to get better relationships. But at the same time, it's that everybody, it's on the Monopoly board, that not everybody's got the same deal in a way. It's if you join the Monopoly game halfway through and everybody else is kind of doing really well, and you kind of in a way, you can't just follow the same rules as everybody else. It's with diets, where they say there's these body types, and different body types revolve around different sets of steps to basically to be able to achieve, whether it's the weight loss or the weight gain or the muscle, whatever it is they want to do. That you can't just give one message to everybody and have it apply to their situation. The same as whether it's I suppose in court, you've got to listen to the case, or when you see a GP, you've got to listen to the case. or like whatever it is that's going on uniquely within us. But at the same time, it's kind of weird because we do have patterns that emerge, and these patterns, it's like at a video store, or what used to be a video store. It's like, you've got the comedy section, then you've got the romance section, then you've got the horror section, then you've got the sci-fi and drama. And we do have these similarities. So like experts do have something to say. What do you reckon, the way going forward at the moment, what do experts need to do to be more relevant right now?
It's a really good question. And I'm actually going to just cover something else that you shared because there was so much goodness in there. I'll put a pause on the answer to this question around experts and what they need to do around relevancy. But I love how you mentioned Monopoly, because I was thinking of this the other day, how you can have two people playing a game of Monopoly and their experience can be completely different. For example, Scott, if you have Park Lane and Mayfair and I land on Park Lane or Mayfair, how are you going to feel? They're the most expensive, things that you can purchase and stuff. So you're going to be happy because I need to pay you money. When I land on Park Lane or Mayfair, I hope I'm remembering it correctly. It's been probably more than 10 years since I've played. But the point is that, if I land on it, I'm going to be kicking myself. Why did I roll the dice that way? Oh no, I have to give over money. So it's the same experience objectively of someone landing on a house or hotel or whatever it is, and how it can be interpreted completely differently by two different people, depending on where they're at, their journey, their mindset, their attitude. And in the case of Monopoly, it's whoever's ahead in the game. But in the case of what we're consuming, we always interpret what we're consuming based on the lens that we have at that point in time.
Yep.
And, we, both of us could see something and view it completely differently, either with admiration or intense criticism because of our internal mindset, or again, lens. I use this idea of glasses, that we're all wearing glasses. And you shared it so lovely in such a lovely way when you talked about movies and genres. And I've always had this view that we create the genre of the movie that we're living in any given day, whether it's a comedy, whether it's a romance, whether it's a drama, whether it's a horror movie, whether it's, action. We almost create that from the moment we wake up, what we choose to consume, what we choose to do with our time, how we choose to think. And depending on what genre you're adopting and what lens you're wearing, that will shade how you see things. And the importance about that is, there's one piece around being aware of how you're shaping your day. But, even myself, I will come across things that I'll read or things that I'll see, and I'll have a very strong view towards it. And sometimes I have to catch myself out and say, hold on a second, why did I feel so strongly? And often the feeling could be quite negative, like, why did that person write that? Or that doesn't make sense. And I think, why did I think that way? What glasses am I wearing? What lens do I have that's coloring my interpretation of this thing?
Yep.
Is that interpretation correct? Is it helping me? Is there perhaps a different way I could look at it where it's more beneficial to progress and growth? And so that idea of self-coaching is something which is really powerful, and it's really, really simple. It doesn't require, a degree in any particular thing or a qualification. It's essentially just asking yourself questions as a curious, almost like a curious third party. Why did you think that? What led you to that? Did something trigger you? Does it link to something else? And that's a really useful process to kind of move through if you're feeling stuff and you can't figure it out. So I just wanted to share that because I love how you made those 2 points. But this idea of experts and relevancy, I think, so this is purely based on my observations, what I've seen. A lot of experts, thought leaders or exceptional people in business, they have a formula that they share around, this is my story, this is my value, these are my pillars, and this is what I'm about. And they share it continually, which is great. I think it's great for building brand because they become really closely linked to that. However, sometimes when things like this happen and all of a sudden it's not normal anymore, they don't actually change their message enough for people to go, oh, yeah, you really get us. I understand you, you understand me. They're still going with their, their premise, and then they might throw in like a line at the end, and it actually feels very insincere.
Yeah.
So I think around relevancy, a big part of it is actually being really realistic and transparent. I'm such a believer in experts sharing their struggles, because the other thing that often happens when it comes to experts is they almost gain some kind of celebrity status, where people view them on this pedestal and they are amazing and they're perfect. And, yes, their thoughts may be incredible, and yes, their thought leadership is phenomenal, but they're still people at the end of the day. And we know that as humans, we make mistakes. We have weird emotional bouts of things we can't figure out. We get frustrated, we get sad. We all go through this whole range of things as a result of our human experience, which is beautiful because we know that we can connect to everybody through that. no matter what you see on the outside, what you see on social media, what someone's putting in a magazine, behind that beauty and the curated version of what they're sharing is a real person. So I think the value experts can really be sharing now is how the value that, well, rather what their benefit is, how they package that up is still important, but really be transparent and real about what's happening right now for them, for the people that they're in touch with, and then linking what they're, the value that they add, bringing it into that, so that those listening, they trust them, they believe them. And there's so much strength in vulnerability as well, because if they experience it, then that validates that I'm okay, I'm not weird, that I experience it too.
Exactly. Like, two of the things that seems to make a person likable is that they don't judge you, so you feel like you're safe to be in that space. And often experts, they can sometimes accidentally or on purpose, however it comes about, create the perception that they're judging anybody who doesn't live up to their rules. And another thing that seems to make somebody really likable is to drop the filters and be more almost like natural in a way. It's like, there's the core message, but the more willing they are to kind of flow with the conversation and kind of like somebody wanders off, instead of like going like, everybody, stick with
This is the
whatever
only way, you must stay on this path. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually to the point, there's a, I can't remember what it is, but it's some kind of model in psychology where it's found based on research that you come across as more appealing to others, more approachable, more likable if you make a mistake. And the research that was done was that they got, they got students or participants in to listen to some interviews with other people. And I believe the interviews were staged, and the people listening were then rating how likable they found the person to be.
Yeah.
And in the interviews, they had two types. One type of interview was with someone giving, perfect answers. The other type of interview was with someone giving perfect answers, but then spilling coffee on themselves at the end. And, they could hear it through the audio. And what they found was overwhelmingly, people found the person who spilled the coffee on themselves much more likable and much more approachable. And it was interesting because everything else was almost identical. However, this one thing around this human element of being just human was the part that really drew people in. So again, it's lowering that veil of perfection and idealism and actually just being authentic and raw.
Exactly. It's so funny. It's like in movies, they've got like this beautiful woman that they have at the start of the movie, and she's absolutely perfect as far as like any suitor might think. It's like she's gorgeous, she's smart, she's sophisticated, she's maybe rich, and such a nice person. And she's got the glasses and the ponytail or something, and she's basically a device that the movies are using as kind of this perfect image. And then she's holding these books and she drops them. And then
we've all seen the movies with that as the opening scene or one of the openings.
Yeah, that's when the guy goes like, "Oh, I can approach her like because she's got a flaw. She's clumsy, or she tripped on a rock, whatever it was. It's like she needs help. I can come rescue her now." And it's such the people making those movies, they know exactly what they're doing to the men. They know exactly what they're showing them. It's like it's activating things.
It's calculated.
Because absolutely, like the response from the audience can be very predictable.
It's interesting, just on this topic that we're talking about, it is an interesting insight that as people, we prefer imperfection.
Yeah.
Like, why is it that we have such a strong reaction sometimes when someone comes across as too perfect? Why is it that there's almost an aversion towards this? Like, why can't people have lives that are amazingly perfect? It's probably because we know deep down that it's not possible. And so if someone is demonstrating that on the outside, they're hiding something, or they can't be trusted. There's some, I don't know, maybe people say it's inauthentic because you can't be that way. But it's just a fascinating insight that as people, I think deep down we know that no one's perfect.
Exactly. There was actually a good example of this, like with, I think was a pharaoh, Tutankhamun's dad or something, like where he basically, he got rid of, they had like a whole series of gods that people would worship. And he basically got rid of them from their culture and text. And then he himself became the god. And people seemed to turn against him, like that the equivalents like that they would have had like in ancient Egypt as polls, or an approval rating of some kind. It's like that they still measured it, but they measured it sort of like more in kind of like mutinies, riots, deaths, and wars, and all sorts of things. But it's like that they found that people did riot more, people did kind of turn against him, because it's like that he's, you know, just like one person. Whereas like then Tutankhamun had to like bring the old gods back, but they found that that message didn't spread as much as like in a way Christianity, which has these two messages of, or two players. Like there's this God, then there's Jesus, and then the God is meant to be so far above you that if you climb to the top of the hill, he's not there. If you go into space, he's not. So it's like in another realm of some kind that, you know, this, or like if through psychology and language we kind of say like it's not a he because it shouldn't, you know, be contained by biology. So it's something that you'll never reach.
It's beyond
And that
human
sort of explains
comprehension.
yeah. And on the other side, like this Jesus idea is that the person did die, that he suffered, that he went through things, he made mistakes. And so like you've got this real kind of like this difference or this disparity between the power levels, but then they're saying that it's still you know, the one character in a way, which is really fascinating. It's like how the brain responds to a story like that is much more likely to spread. It's so much more similar to like the Joseph Campbell hero's journey, where, you know, the person had to suffer, and that makes them relatable. It's like the same as like any expert that you listen to. You tend to like, you're not even so much in love with their steps as kind of like their anti steps or their story or their origin story in a way. That people need to go through something, and we found in a way it's less what a person has, as in are they a billionaire or something, that we still use that as prestige, whether we're talking about Richard Branson or anybody else or Elon Musk. But it's, we're still kind of talking about like their origin story, because that's the stuff that we seem to sort of think that, you know, I could be that person. They become like more like that silhouette archetype, like where you could fit into that shape that's being kind of like left for you. It's like I could be that person who then gets, you know, sucked up into success or works my way up to success. But absolutely that relatability,
And
whether it's like, you know, Robert Kiyosaki, Tony
yeah,
Robbins, or even like Batman. We just keep seeing, you know, that his parents got shot at age 10, and that seems to be like part of the attraction of the character, is like that we want to know like Batman, but why is he Batman? Oh, that's why he's Batman. He has money and he suffered, and the thing that made him suffer was crime. So like he's dedicated his life to justice, and so like that's such a personal reason that we get as to why is this person doing this thing. And I guess like to relate it back to the COVID in a way and the lockdown, it's if we've got people that we don't believe are affected in any way by this, they're coming in and telling us how to live. Obviously, I suppose people can turn against them and say, like, what would you know about having to live like the rest of us? Um, it really is
it's
fascinating.
like just on that, it's so interesting because there was, I think, a bunch of celebrities, you know, movie stars or something, created a, they were using John Lennon's Imagine, I think it was that song,
Yeah,
and they each sung like a little piece and they put together this video. It was all about, you know, we're in this together. And the
yeah,
feedback was actually quite negative because people were saying, yes, you in your giant mansions with your maids, you don't understand actually what the real person's going through. And it was such an interesting paradox because here they were coming together, you know, bringing about unity, trying to encourage this togetherness, and people were completely turning against them. And it's because of this point that we need to be able to relate to someone to actually have any trust in them and what they're doing. And that's why, you know, you mentioned it, people love these rags to riches stories because it's about someone just like me who grew up in a place just like me and went through hardship just like I've been through, and look what
yeah,
they've achieved. And you know, you mentioned it, it's their why. We're so
yeah,
driven to tap it, you know, to understand what is the why of someone, why are they doing what they're doing, because again that builds trust. But I think it also, I think there's a deeper level where, you know, we know Simon Sinek Golden Principle, we know the importance of sharing your why with someone, but we also know the importance of having our own why. You know, why do you get up in the morning, for the sake of what? You know, the why piece around why you live your life. And it's because deep down, this sense of meaning, this need to provide a meaning lens to our lives is so strong as humans. And it's been around, you know, we know from centuries worth of philosophers and discourse and literature that, you know, people have been searching for it for a very, very long time.
exactly.
You know, and it reminds me of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning.
Yep.
Have you heard of it? Yeah. And his experience going through the Holocaust as in a concentration camp, and how he saw people around him suffer and give up and eventually perish. And there were only a few, him included, who were able to push through and actually survive that. And then he dedicated his life, he's a psychologist and all these other things, dedicated his life to actually studying meaning. And he shares some incredible insights, which, you know, I encourage anyone to go out and have a look at. But it's, yeah, I think when you hear the stories of someone who's been through the hardship and then achieved a lot, it
Yeah,
taps into that. It builds the emotional connection.
exactly. So I think like as a bit of a hook, we'd all love to have like more money, more health, better relationships, and more happiness and time efficiency tricks. That's like in a way like that's on one level like that's what we're in it for. And like perhaps like today, if I could ask you about your story, talking about like how you did better, um, than the past, like in a lot of those areas. But at the same time, kind of like what I loved, like when I saw you on stage, is like because I haven't seen you like in previous times. Like what I saw was amazing, was polished. But I could kind of see like that you can't get to doing that without kind of like perhaps like failing at it at least once or twice first. It's like perhaps like being on stage, like sharing a message and saying, "Look, I really want to reach you guys with something, a message that's on my heart, and I've done a lot of work to get this message right for you guys." And everyone go, not necessarily just boo, but kind of like not to land, or that silence that you get, like where everyone crosses their arms and kind of gives you nothing. And then what I saw was like everybody was engaged. Which kind of means that I would have to assume you've been through those like steps to get there. What I'd love to hear is like, how did you get there, or like, why did you choose to, in a way, like dedicate your life to helping others, to going through what you had to get through, perhaps like, the failure to success. How did this start for you? Like, how did you become like a speaker, trainer, educator, TED talker, all of these accomplishments, sharing the
It
stage with billionaires?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because when I think how did it start, like I can almost look back to when I was a kid or when I was a teenager. But one really pivotal experience for me was actually when I was 16. My parents got divorced or separated and then divorced, and it was, for me it was interesting for two reasons. So I idolized their relationship. I wanted that for myself, and then all of a sudden when I discovered that it wasn't working out, I realized that everything I thought to be true wasn't, and it challenged my perception of reality at a really young age, and I really struggled with that.
Mm,
And then the flip side was, because I was struggling going through that, I found that how I made myself feel better was actually by focusing on other people who were worse off. Because in the scheme of things, my parents, it was an amicable breakup at least, and they're still great friends now, so that's fantastic. But in the scheme of things, it wasn't hugely traumatic, especially when I reminded myself that there were so many others out there that had worse off experiences. So I dedicated a lot of my early years as a teenager, late teenager, to actually serving others, to volunteering, to running empowerment groups for junior youth, helping them recognize their moral discernment and things like that. So I tapped in really early to this idea of the fulfillment that I feel when I'm actually helping others be better. And also reminding myself of the perspective of knowing that there are always people who are worse off. You just have to be grateful for what you have. So that was really, really a pivotal moment when I was 16. I studied psychology. I studied law. I love what's going on in people's brains. So I loved psychology. I think human behavior is fascinating, and I always have ever since back then. Pursued law. I was miserable for 4 years. Moved into a different industry. So I basically did 10 years working in corporate. And during that time, I learned that a lot of people are miserable, and they are made more miserable by the fact that they continually refresh their misery through what they say and what they share with others.
yeah.
So, I'd get to work on a Monday and I'd hear people saying, "Oh gosh, it's Monday. Oh, can't this week be over already? Oh, I can't wait for next weekend." Continually reiterating this state of, "I don't want to be here." And what they didn't realize is that by saying these things, by verbalizing these things, it actually was shaping their physiology. So, how they show up to work, it was shaping how they then feel, which was then shaping their reality and their performance. And it was just this giant cycle of creation.
Mm,
So, I started reigniting my passion for human behavior and the psychology that I'd initially studied. I did additional research. I did coaching qualifications. I looked at positive psychology and did a diploma in that. I studied a master of business as well to understand, are there things within a business context, landscape, structures that are making people feel like they're a little bit oppressed?
yeah.
And it was interesting overlaying all of that. But it wasn't until, I actually started the speaking halfway through my corporate career. So in about year 5, I thought, okay, I need to help people and I don't know how to do it in this context. So I'm just going to run a free workshop at lunchtime and invite a bunch of people. And we got over 100 people in a room, and it was touching on basically mindset, the science of mindset, the science of happiness. Funny enough, the content for the talk ended up becoming my book. which is on the art and science of happiness, because I received such positive feedback from people about how basic concepts, and these are basic, it was leading to transformations in people once they recognized the power that they have over their reality through their thoughts. So that was the initial. It was just, doing something that I loved and I was driven to do, which was sharing and being of value and of service to people, hearing the positive feedback and the power that they had, and then just doing it more. And to your point around doing it a lot, there were lots of examples when I'd pull an audience together and they were not interested, they didn't resonate with the message. This idea of rejection or social failure was something I had to get really used to.
Yep.
And there have been so many experiences in my life. So I'm a big believer of just go for an opportunity and you will likely get knocked back, and that's okay. Just go for another one. And it's only through doing that so many times that I've gotten really comfortable with it. So the idea of getting to a point where you're comfortable, you know your stuff, you've done the research, you have the experience, so much of it comes from practice and believing in yourself. Because there are still times when that inner critic comes in and says, who are you to be standing in front of this audience sharing your experiences or what the research says? There might be someone in that audience who is far more experienced than you are. And the reality is that could be the case. There may be, I'm sure there are plenty of other people who know so much more about what I speak about. However, I once heard someone say that you don't need to be the top of the pyramid when it comes to your content. You just have to be passionate about it. You have to have a desire to add value and serve others. And you just need to be 10 steps ahead of your audience. And I kind of loved that last one, because we hold ourselves back so much by telling ourselves we're not ready, we don't know enough, we haven't done enough preparation, people won't like it, what if this, what if that? And we completely sabotage. We end up being stuck. As soon as you remove those thoughts from your head and just go out and try it, it's the best way to learn. And that's how I really believe any truly successful person has done it. Yeah. They've just said yes and figured the rest out as they went.
Like in saying being 10 steps ahead of the audience, a lot of people have that thing that they would call, imposter syndrome, or who am I to say that I'm better than anyone? And so the way it gets heard or translated the words that they sometimes use, it could be, I'm not better than anybody else and no one else is better than me. And we're not really saying that one person's better than the other. What we're saying is that like one person's prepared something more because the other people, like in marketing stuff, like something that I have always heard in marketing is prepare a message that can be understood by the intelligence of a 5-year-old. And so I was thinking like, well, isn't that really insulting? Like going like, treating everyone like they're 5, but it's not an insult. What it was is that they're basically saying, we've done some tests and what we've worked out is that people aren't stupid, they're busy. And without busyness, to be 10 steps ahead of the audience is that like what you've done is you've done labor for them. Some of that labor is research. It's basically kind of crunching the numbers or like doing, getting something and sort of basically putting your own spin, putting your own perspective on it in a story in a way that, that you can be a teacher. Because with that whole, like, treat people like they're, it's not about treat people like they're 5. It's basically what they said is that when they've measured a 5-year-old that's giving 100% of their focus versus an adult who's giving a little bit because like they're in a seminar and they've got their phones now, or like they're watching you on the computer and if they get bored of the big screen, they look at the little one. The amount of keywords that they pick up is the same as like a 5-year-old giving their full attention. So that's where kind of we really shouldn't translate it as an insult, or it doesn't need to be imposter syndrome to say that, yeah, you've done more. It's like the same as like with the Olympics, one person's the fastest person. That doesn't mean that they're a better human being. It doesn't mean that the people that aren't as fast as them aren't as equal in importance as that they're a living person with feelings. But that's, sometimes I think that's, what I might hear when somebody says, 10 steps ahead, it's that they hear it differently. Not to say that they've heard it wrong. It's that like with that dress that we're talking
lens.
about,
it's the lens that they're wearing and how they're perceiving. Yeah.
That dress that's like, it's white and gold, or it's black and blue, or it's depending on how they see it.
Yeah, let's not get into that debate. No, you're so right. And it's, to your point, the moment that you start thinking, I am better than anyone else, they are better than me, that's dangerous thinking. That's a negative cycle. It's never about superiority being better. It's actually just about So I love that you mentioned the 5-year-old, you know, appealing to a 5-year-old. The way I see it is that's being respectful of an adult's attention ability in that moment
Yeah.
and their time. When you can make something condensed, concise, and almost put your spin on it around like, here are the 3 principles, the 5-step framework, the 5 things you need to know, people appreciate it because you've, to your point, you've done the hard work. You've
Yeah.
gone out there. It's like the funnel. You've gotten all the stuff and you're giving them that little gift at the end. And
Yeah.
a lot of it is around, in terms of mindset, a lot of people hold themselves back because they focus so much on how they're being perceived by the audience. Am I competent? Am I credible? Will they like me? Will they like this message? Will they resonate? It's so like center focused. It's all about you. As soon as you shift it and go, how can I add the most value to them? How can I serve them however they need to be served? It completely changes your perspective, because then, you know, it's not self-promotion anymore. It's having a platform to share a really important message to your community, to your network.
Exactly.
So it's
What I
simple mindset shifts.
Absolutely. Like what I love that you've said is because because I have a background in therapy. I've been doing that for 10 years with addiction and helping people with that sort of thing. Mainly, smokers, ice, marijuana, um, and food as well, like different addictions, like where people kind of they find there's a particular language that they use where they associate themselves with the addiction or they associate themselves with behavior. And like what you were talking about is like how people use their language, people use their words to create what they're in. And that doesn't mean that, like, say, like if somebody's in a wheelchair and they're like a paraplegic, not the quadriplegic, but just a paraplegic, like they can't use their legs, telling them that they're in a wheelchair doesn't necessarily, it doesn't harm their legs to tell them that. Or if the doctor has to, be the one to say that, you are a paraplegic. Giving them a label doesn't necessarily change that physical aspect. But what they say next can change their response to it. It can change whether or not they suffer. But if somebody has depression, let's say that, the label of depression wasn't necessarily the thing that caused the depression in the first place. There was like a cause, like whether it was money stuff, health stuff, relationship stuff, or brain chemistry, whatever it is that, we could say was the first cause. But then calling them, saying that they have depression or that they have anxiety does have that secondary effect where it creates that lens. If somebody's grieving versus if somebody has anxiety, we tend to, like, in our culture in a way, it's like we see grieving as temporary, like it will end. But when somebody has anxiety, or we say that they have anxiety, we see it as like, that's just going to go on forever until the day they die. And that's, in a way, like it's an attitude and a lens that we have, is that we don't kind of say that you're going through some anxiety for the moment, the same as we could say that you're going through some grief at the moment, and within 3 months, you're going to feel very different. And so, like, what we found a lot of the time is like that with high performance studies is that anything that happened 3 months ago or further into the past cannot actually have an effect on your happiness today. And these studies have been done like with basically, thousands of people before the Hawthorne experiments as well. So it was kind of when they found that everybody was reporting that they were a 7 out of 10 happy, unless they just got married. They're a 9 or a 10. They've had a death in the family. They're a 1 or a 2, but it never goes more than 3 months. It's something like the same as that they've won the lottery. They're a 10. And we know that something like the high 90%, 90 something, I can't remember the exact stat. It was the high 90% of people that won the lottery within 4 years were more broke than what they were before the law, because they've learned how to spend that much money, but they never really kind of had the mindset to create that amount of money. But it's really it's interesting how this framework of what I love is that if you keep repeating something to yourself, you are actually going to attract more of that. Like if you buy a red car, you're going to see more red cars. If you buy a blue one, you're going to see more blue ones. You get pregnant, then you start to see
more pregnant
everywhere.
people and prams. Yeah.
You got engaged, so wedding dress shops pop up.
Yeah. And that's also clever marketing on the part of, Facebook pixels and stuff, but it's so true. Yeah, they do. So 3 quick things I want to mention on that. Oh gosh, do I remember what the 3 things were? The first one, oh yes. So this idea of labeling and categorization and, saying someone is depressed as opposed to they're going through, a depressive period right now. You're so right about the power that has in terms of someone's mindset towards it and the lens that they wear. And it reminds me of this thing called Pygmalion effect, which you might be aware of, which is where in schools, Yeah, exactly. It's this idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So they did a lot of studies in schools where they found that students who, so if, new classroom, new teacher, the teacher was told beforehand which students were the smart ones and which were the not so smart ones. And what they noticed is that the smart ones would get more attention and perform better than the not so smart ones. They replicated the study again, where they completely randomly assigned the smart kids. So it wasn't correct, but they told the teacher, oh, this group over here is smart. Wasn't the case. This group over here is not so smart. Not the case. But then through the teacher's actions and behaviors and attention that she placed on the kids, they actually lived up to or lived down to the expectation that she had. So for the kids that she believed were smart, she applied more attention, gave them more positive reinforcement, and they performed far better than the other kids, even though at baseline they were all equal. And this applies for adults as well. And, in the workplace, I do a lot of work in corporate strategy and coaching within the corporate space. The
Mm.
same thing applies. If a manager or a leader has, sorry, Scott, are you still there?
Yes.
We just had a phone call come through on the iPad.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It only seemed to be about 3 seconds or something.
Okay, good. Wonderful. Where was I? Yes. So in the corporate space, we see this a lot where you have leaders or managers who, have a favoritism towards a certain person, and they will often perform better than someone that they've written off and said this person will never perform. Because as adults, we want to live up to whatever we're told about ourselves. So when it comes to labels around you're a good person, you're a bad person, you have depression, you have grief, sometimes we actually impose those. Sorry, did it happen again?
Yes. It was only about a
Yeah,
second.
sorry.
Okay.
Okay, good. Uh, so that's the first piece. The other piece that's really interesting is, so this links into something that I actually did want to share during our time together, which is this idea of during this time of this situation or during this corona era,
Mm.
what I've been seeing a lot of on social media is people adopting one of four mindsets. There are really distinct mindset trends that I've picked up on based on social media, what people are posting, what people are sharing, what people are commenting.
Yes.
So I did a little bit of, research in terms of what's driving that and what are people saying and why. And so there are essentially four, I call them lenses. I don't want to call them labels, because as soon as someone says, oh, well, that's me, then they're basically saying they can never change. It goes back to growth mindset. If you look at Carol Dweck's work on what a growth mindset is, she says that you should never say to a child, oh, Jimmy, you're so smart, because then you're telling Jimmy that he doesn't have to work hard. He doesn't have to put into any effort. He just is that thing. And then often what happens is Jimmy doesn't end up fulfilling his potential because he's never been rewarded for the effort that he's put in. And other kids that hear you say that to Jimmy then say to themselves, oh, well, I mustn't be smart. And then they develop a fixed mindset and never develop it. So kind of different thing, but really interesting. But when it comes to the mindsets people are adopting now, I call them corona personas or lenses. Lenses because, glasses you can actually take off and put on another pair at any point, so that they're fluid. But the four that I'm seeing, and can I go into this now, Scott? Is that all right?
Absolutely. That's what I want.
Wonderful. Brilliant. I just feel like it fits really well because it's this idea of, is it a label or is it just recognizing that this is a lens I'm wearing and I can remove it? So the first one that we see a lot of is the doomers, the doom and gloomers. They're kind of more pessimistic about things. They focus on the detrimental impacts to the economy and we're never going to recover and the world's never going to be the same, and doom and gloom. It's generally a pessimistic explanatory style. And now this particular explanatory style also influences how they live their lives and their attitude towards everything else. But what we see in this particular time, they're sharing very kind of negative, pessimistic material. Then we have the refuters. So the refuters are those who deny what's happening. They may be the skeptics, science skeptics, conspiracy theorists. They believe that maybe there isn't even a pandemic at all. It's all just a fabrication to distract us from something far more sinister. That maybe global governments around the world know that they're going into an economic depression and they're trying to distract the fact that it's because of their own inaction and recklessness. Then we have the third category is the believers, or I call them Destiny's children. People who believe that what's happening right now is fated. It's destiny. It has been written in the cards. We should expect it because we've gone through such a period of materialism and consumption and destroying the environment and destroying the earth. This is the world's way of saying, hold on, you can't treat me this way. So it's the great equalization. And it's, you know, that's often driven by a belief instinct around spirituality or some kind of higher purpose. And then the fourth lens is the realistic optimist lens. Now, realistic optimists or optimistic realists, whichever way you want to look at it, they recognize that, yes, there's a huge amount of uncertainty. There is a lot of stuff going on that doesn't make sense and it's challenging and the world is thrown into overwhelm. But there are still things that each of us can do each and every day to get through, to provide support to others, to offer service to others. They're very realistic about what's happening, but optimistic in their mindset. Hope is really, really central to them. So it's this idea around pragmatism. So you can see based on each of those four sonars or lenses, how that shapes how someone feels and wakes up every morning. And then how they respond when they read something in the news or they see something that someone else shares in social media, whether they have more of a positive, optimistic view, whether they are overly critical, whether they, you know, just let themselves feel really down as a result of it. Now, the beauty about these lenses is that, you know, to the point around categorization, you're not fixed in one of them. So the questions that you want to ask yourself at any point in time is, you know, what am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling that way? Is it helpful to what I want for myself? Is it helpful for my life and my potential? And if it's not, then the beauty of lenses, what do you do if you don't like a particular pair of sunglasses? You take them off and you try on another pair until you find one that suits your face shape. So the same idea with these lenses is you can actually take them off through conscious choice and put on one that's going to be more suitable. And, you know, I'm not going to share my view on which I think is more suitable. I think everyone will have a strong opinion on that. But generally, making sure that hope is central to what we're doing. And having an optimistic approach to everything. And optimism doesn't mean denying. It's not about denial of the bad stuff. It's actually about acknowledging the bad stuff, recognizing the suffering, but actually understanding that we control then how we feel and what we see about that. Are there lessons to grow? Are there things that we can learn? How will I operate differently? How will I be more grateful? That's really what optimism is about.
I really love these sophisticated distinctions that you give. Because sometimes I think that we can fall into the trap of like saying, should you be one or the other? Should you be team Rainbow Blast everyone or team miserable? And it's like they both sound wrong. It's like, let's say like if you're in a car and you're optimistic that you're going to get to your friend's house, but the all of the windows are caked up with mud so you can't see. So that basically is someone who can't measure where they're at. So they can be optimistic, yeah, I think I'll get to my friend's house, but I can't actually see through the windows. Another one could be basically the windows are clean, they can see where they are, so that they're looking at the current situation, which is they're not at their friend's house, but they don't know their friend's address. So this person like is very, they're not very optimistic. They might call themselves a realist. You can say like, we have to keep reminding ourselves that we're not there and we don't know where it is. Whereas perhaps then this like other category could be the person who can see through the windows, but they also know the address and they've got a GPS and a map. So both are there. It's like that they need to know where they're going. They need to know where they're at. And so optimism does also need to have like some self-measurements, or else you basically, like one way, because I love that the frameworks that you have, it's like that they're lenses, but we're not saying that everything comes from the lens. Because the lenses, in a way, like they only show what's there, but they only show one category of what's there. It's like all these things exist, but our brains really only tune in to the lens that we've got on. Because some people might argue against, like, you know, oh, you can't say it's a lens because there actually is an actual thing going on. It's like, well, yes, we're not disagreeing that there's an actual thing going on, current situation, whatever that's called. But we are saying, though, that it's like this quote of, I think it was Winston Churchill, like, never let a good crisis go to waste. Where somebody says, shoulders of giants, or that if every time a disaster hits humanity, an expert or a hero emerges to basically dissolve that disaster. And it could be that, you know, like that Africa shoe salesman story where two shoe salespeople go to Africa, and one comes back and says, bad news, they don't even have shoes there. And I'm sure that they've got shoes, I'm not sure. But that whole, bad news, they don't even have shoes there. There's no market for it. And the other person says, great news, they don't even have shoes in Africa. We can be the first. I have no idea about the accuracy of whether or not they have shoes.
I think it was in the mid 1900s or early 1900s anyway. So let's just say they
Yeah,
didn't.
exactly. But like the point was like that both are a lens. It's like there was the optimist versus the pessimist. And what we're kind of almost saying in a way is that they're both incomplete if one is just saying everything's fine and the other is saying everything's awful. Because both of them actually lack measurement and vision.
Yes. And just on the topic of the shoe salesman analogy, I did a little bit of extra research on that because I was really curious to know what actually happened to that, like who knows even if it's a true story, I don't even know. But there was a really interesting take where it was a potential future that had come out of that, where the really optimistic person who'd gone back and said, there's an amazing opportunity, we should go, went there and invested all this money and took all this stuff. And then the business was a flop because those people didn't need shoes because they'd never worn shoes and it was so far removed from their reality. And so it's an example of where you can be so honorable in your intentions and it just doesn't work out. But then there's more to the story where by simply being in that country and understanding what people needed and being really humble about the fact that maybe he was wrong, he recognized that what they needed more were not shoes, it was hats, because sun was getting into their eyes, leading to early blindness and all of this kind of thing. So he pivoted his business and then, brought all these hats and they were able to, enjoy the hats and it was wildly profitable. So it's this perfect idea of, often we need to acknowledge that it's not just about being one way. Different perspectives and different opinions actually help us make better decisions because they balance us.
Yes.
And the reality is, when I look at these four lenses, in a way, you could argue that any of them independently, there is some element of truth to it, depending on which angle you choose to take. And that's why almost having the combination of all four, like almost, a healthy small dose of some of the pessimism and but not viewing it as pessimism, viewing it as an analytical approach that, where you're really, really looking at the data, the numbers, what's happening beyond just what we're being told. That's really important. Discernment is so important. And the other point around how, you mentioned the idea of you need directions when you're in a car. I love that because and you'll know this. So my book, the biggest insight I had from my book in terms of the research that I did to then formulate my 5 hacks. So I've got 5 happiness hacks.
Yeah.
The biggest insight is that happiness is not something that you are. Someone is just not happy because they're happy. It's something that you do. So being happy is something that you do. It's a set of consistent actions and, thought processes. And when you consistently apply them, it leads to a greater sense of happiness or optimism. So I love how all of this stuff just kind of weaves in. It's so perfect.
Yeah. Because it all comes from a positive intention and experience and the desire to share and help somebody else to basically feel better or do better. Or like what I was saying about increase function, so do better, or reduce pain to suffer less. Like a lot of people sort of in the East, experts for 5,000 years have been saying basically, the point of life is to reduce pain or to reduce suffering. Others, I suppose, in the West have said like the point of life is progress. And both could be true. One version of this that I like, if you're happy to kind of like go down like a little bit of a rabbit hole of with the Wizard of Oz, these characters that like, was it Dorothy? So she met like these 2 characters first. Like one was basically, the Tin Man and the other was the Scarecrow. And they both wanted like a wish. Like one was to get a brain, the other was to get a heart. And I like to almost like look at it as like, the right and left hemisphere. Like we know kind of this is an overgeneralization, like to say almost like, the front of the brain is the conscious bit, or the middle is habits and feelings, and the back is like.
But hey, a 5-year-old would understand it. So I think people appreciate it.
So we'd like to purposely hang a lantern and say that this is not at this level of detail, which is just to use it for metaphorical value. It's like when people use quantum physics, it's for metaphorical value. It's not to say that we're going to like start doing like, double slit experiments or any of those kinds of things ourselves. But with kind of like the Tin Man and Scarecrow, it seems as though that like the Tin Man in his behavior was kind of like the scientist. He's literal, he's left brain, but he's also that when we saw him, he was very stuck, and he needed the oil, and the oil's like this thing that he can't tap into himself, and he needed to dig deeper to find what he wanted, and he needed to basically trust again. And he was also a bit of a spectator because, like, for ages, he was just sort of like sitting there, just watching everything happen. But on the other side, you've got kind of like the scarecrow. That what they are, they're almost like kind of like because they were looking for a method to be able to work things out, or they were calling it the brain. And there's a lot of insults. I want to kind of like push all that insult stuff aside as to like saying someone doesn't have a brain or someone doesn't have a heart, because it's just at a metaphorical level. What it was is they were struggling to tap into something. And so the scarecrow, like when we met him, he was stuck as well. He was like living something that was unsustainable. Like he was like all of his stuff was like the crows were attacking him and pulling out like all of his hay. And so he was basically, like right brain. He had more in common with an addict. So it's kind of like that it taps into like, I feel things, but I have no idea what I'm looking at. And so I just grab like whether it's like the gut intuition, the correct stuff that you need to be doing for passion, and equally though the donut, the heroin, the ice, the thing that's going to just sort of like band-aid everything off unsustainably. And he needed more kind of in a way truth. He needed something that was basically he needed to be able to see the world in a way where he could trust that numbers and observation and research was something that he could follow. And so that he kind of lived his life in a way like a credit card, and eventually he was going to run out of pay. Could we almost say that like that both of them kind of have something to offer? Both of them are struggling with something. In any way, could that fit into like the categories, like the lenses that we're talking about? Could they be like in a way a lens, or like what are your thoughts on those characters?
Oh, what an interesting, what an interesting analogy. I love it because it also, one of the things that I speak about, which you'll know of, is, and it's very well known in research, obviously two sides of the brain. You've got your rational, logical side, conscious side, and then your automatic, unconscious, emotional side, which is almost like the sides you were just talking about. And I think when it comes to overlaying them on the lenses, it probably depends. I think it depends on someone's life experience. It's almost like the pre-lens before they move into the Corona personas lenses.
Yeah.
I would generally, what was that?
I love Corona personas.
Yeah, Corona personas. Yeah, so it's almost what do I say? So imagine that what's a good example? You have an umbrella that's either red or blue. Red being, the emotive part of the brain, blue being your factual part of the brain. And you're holding it forward. So you can kind of see the world through the umbrella, but it's phased by what you're seeing. It's semi-opaque. That's your pre-lens. And then that shapes what Corona persona you then have to do with the actual current pandemic. So let's say that you're highly emotional, highly emotive, very in touch with, the part of the brain around the amygdala and the relationship building and all of this. And you've been through a lot of trauma and hardship, and you are broken. Mm. You are still highly emotional and emotive and driven by that. But then you come and you're faced with what's happening in the current situation. And it can do one of two things. It can completely throw you off balance. The overwhelm becomes too much because you feel like you have no support. You feel like there's no one who understands you, and then you'd fall into the pessimist space or the refuter space potentially. Or that trauma has given you such a heightened sensitivity and a reminder that how much you need connection, that actually when you come and look at the current situation, you're actually all of a sudden realizing, wow, I've never felt so connected before, because there are people on the other side of the planet who are also in isolation, who are also going through the same things. So now I actually feel connected to every single person on this earth. And I've never felt that before. And so you might find yourself more in the, the optimist space or the believer's space. So it's an interesting overlay, but I think it almost comes before you then move on to approaching the current situation.
Because the lenses is like the response. That makes sense. It's like in a way, like there's someone who got bullied as a child, either by teachers, peers, parents, siblings, whoever they got bullied by. But two people got bullied. Two, let's call it two different separate sides of the planet. One person says like, because I got bullied, that's why I learned that you've got to join the bullies, do the maths, and kind of go like, I'm better off with the bullies just harming everybody and being on the winning side. Another person though says that I hated being bullied so much that I would never do that to another living person, creature, or anybody. And I found myself becoming like a real pacifist. It's almost like that, because I just love superhero characters. Batman versus Joker.
Yeah.
They both had a bad day. Batman lost his parents. The Joker, depending on his 15 million different origin stories, had a bad day. One kind of said like, well, you've got to then kind of like see the world as a joke and just like harm everybody. And see it as like, this is just a dream where you get to like, you know, jump over fences and hop on someone's backyard trampoline, screw everything, whatever, like nothing means anything. And on the other side, somebody who basically like, they've gone, I hated what happened to me so much that I now protect the people. But it seems like, you know, like almost in the animal kingdom where we've got stimulus response. And what we're talking about is like more steps than stimulus response, like stimulus story response.
Totally. Totally. Okay, can I quickly share with you the ladder of conclusions?
Yeah.
So it's something that I came across. I was doing a course at Harvard University on coaching. It was actually like further coaching. It wasn't accreditation, but it was supplementary to what I was doing here in Australia. And they introduced me to this concept. It's actually from Chris Agiris. I think that's how you say his name. And he has a version called the ladder of ladder of inference.
Yep.
But I've made it smaller so it's easier and a 5-year-old can understand it. And there's 5 steps. Basically, what happens? The very, very first thing. So this is in terms of your stimulus and response, right? So the first step is there is some kind of stimulus. Something happens in your external environment generally. And you, within a very, very short period of time, split second almost, your body undergoes a biological reaction in response to that. The next step, the next rung on the ladder is that physiologically something happens. You might tense up. You might hold your breath. Your throat might tighten. You might smile. So there's some kind of physiological feeling that comes next. The next step is emotion and thought. So you have to interpret that feeling based on, you know, what you're telling yourself and what you see and what you feel. Yep. You're defining the emotion that you experience as a result of that: fear, anxiety, overwhelm, frustration, joy, elation, whatever it is. From there, there's this beliefs lens. And this is the part we often forget about. The belief lens taps into some belief that you have. For example, let's say, you know, a tiger jumps in front of you. Yep. You're going to go through the biological or biochemical reaction. You go through the feeling of fight or flight, then the emotion and the thought of I am in fear, then the belief of either I am too young to die, I need to get away, in which case you will get away or do whatever you can to get away. Yeah. Or the other belief could be, I'm never going to get away from this, I'm doomed. And then you don't do anything. And then that shapes step 5, which is the conclusion. Your action. Do you try and run away from that tiger, or do you just stay and allow it to eat you? Now, this ladder of conclusions applies regardless of what happens. What happens is these middle chunks between the stimulus and response, we completely forget that they're there because we have lost touch with the ability to understand. And let's face it, sometimes, you know, just the other day or a couple of weeks back, during this period, I started getting very emotional for no reason. Yeah. I don't think there was any kind of stimulus as such. Something just happened. So within me was the stimulus, and then I followed this process. But at any point in time, you can start to unpack this process and ask yourself, what did I feel? You know, what happened? What did I feel? What did I tell myself? What emotion did I attribute to that? What belief did I have? And how did that shape my conclusion? Now, how can I rewire that ladder? How can I change what's happening? And it's essentially just becoming a circuit breaker, because it's a circuit. And often it's based on a default. You can break your own circuit by going back into your thoughts, understanding what the emotion was, why you felt it, looking at your belief, reevaluating the belief, and then changing your conclusion if you wish to. So the beauty there is that it's so empowering.
I love that. Thank you so much. Because that makes so much sense. It's like that. So in kind of today's situation, what we're talking about is that there we are, like looking at either like, a health concern, the economy. Am I going to have a job tomorrow? Am I not? Can I visit, family overseas? Like, what if somebody overseas is sick and I don't get to see them before like these restrictions are lifted? And it's in a way that we can kind of like with stimulus response and say that somebody else has no idea what that's like because they're not going through it. But the person who is, they need to make a decision, notice like it is affecting them physically. Then they, so I did write this down. So there was the events, then the physical part, then the emotion and the thought. They come up with a belief as in that like, well, I can't do anything versus like, or I can maybe Zoom them or Skype them, or perhaps like maybe they still will be here after the restrictions are lifted. Or maybe I need to kind of like push for it, ask for an appeal, look for an exception, which may or may not work, but they still got to try
Yeah.
in some way. And it's like that final little inch that seems to really get people the success. The success not being like, let's all be billionaires in some way, because not everybody can. That's the whole point of there being a
Yeah.
billionaire. There's someone who is richer than everybody else. But what we can all be is just that little bit more conscious of our options, to look at the current situation, go easy on yourself, but still look for a better world, and to realize in a way that like the experts, they've still got a framework that we don't have to throw the whole lot out, or we don't have to throw the whole lot in. What we might do is like reevaluate the framework and say, which parts of these are still really great, because like human psychology in a way will never change. It's just the technology, the circumstances, the environment will change. But the same as like, we've got like programming in our brain from 10,000 years ago. We've got fight or flight, where like if you stand kind of on the edge of a cliff, nearly falling off, you can get the same adrenaline as if there's a build, as if there's rejection, as if you're on stage and you feel that, the crowd's going to like come and physically attack you for saying words on stage. It could happen, but it probably won't. But there can still be like a physical response to it. But then what we, maybe like the body level, we get some say about like, did we sleep the night before? Did we hydrate versus did we treat our body like a credit card that needs to be paid back? But then perhaps like at the more emotional and thought level, that's where kind of, would you say that lenses would be more active during that emotion and thought stage?
Yeah, lenses, I think if we're not aware of them, they just are there and you don't even pay attention, and then it leads you to a conclusion. So
Yeah.
it's definitely that emotion and thought stage that influences how you, that's the interpretation stage, right? That's how you're understanding what's happening and making sense of it and applying meaning to it. That's the stage that we can change. And that's the lens that we can choose to take off and put on another one if we feel like there's one that's more appropriate to us, because that's what then shapes our outcome. That's what shapes the action that we take or don't take.
Yeah. And you might get not the ultimate result ever, but you might get a much better result, or at least a little bit better of a result than perhaps like what was available before.
Oh, absolutely. I think so much of it comes from empowerment. When we feel powerless to do anything, change anything, and we feel like we're a victim of our circumstances, that doesn't feel good. But as soon as we know that, hey, hold on a second, we can actually change an outcome if we want to, then even that knowledge is really empowering. So that if you have the same outcome as you would have had before even knowing that, at least you know that you allowed that to happen and you're okay with that.
Yeah.
So it's a conscious piece. And, while we're saying all this stuff, though, it's still really important to be aware of self-compassion and acknowledging that this stuff sounds so easy when we're talking about it like this, but we know that life is tough. Life is a struggle. It's a challenge. There's all these pressures and overlays that come on top and almost create these additional filters. So if we don't get it right the first time, that's okay. If we don't get it right the second time, third time, 10th time, that's okay. It's just about knowing that we can do small things to change our state, and recognizing that. And then over time, having the right people around you that helps you create the right environment for you to ultimately be your best and lead to better outcomes for yourself.
Yeah. And that these steps is not a mallet to hit ourselves over the head with every time it doesn't turn out the way we want.
Please don't do that.
Yes. But instead what they are is it's an option forward. What I would really love, just before, like, if we can wrap up soon, if people
I was going to say, we could talk for days.
No doubt. In order for, if people want to hear more or find out more about the Corona Personas and more about you, more about what you do, how can people find you?
So I would encourage you to reach out to me on social media, LinkedIn, Instagram. What else do I have? Facebook. or TikTok. I've just jumped on TikTok. I share really short tips. So my area of expertise is mindset, but I also do a lot of work with helping with career direction. So I provide tips around social psychology and how to interact and how to, be more likable, but in an authentic way. So, you're more than welcome to follow there. I do have a handout as well, which I might share with you, Scott. What's the best way to get it out? I'll share
There
it
will
with you as a
be
link, maybe.
a link that way, that way, that way, that
Great.
somewhere.
One of these ways.
Yeah. If it's
Yeah,
on
which
Facebook, the link will be
summarizes.
above. If
Oh,
it's on
yay.
a web page, the link will be below.
Okay, great. So there will be a link and it summarizes the 4 personas for you to have a look at. It's got some questions in there to get you thinking about your own. And then importantly, it has 3 steps that you can take, really easy ones, to help you elevate your state, regardless of what persona you have. And they're all science backed, these steps that I share, with links so you can have a look at further detail if you need to. But definitely reach out. I'd love to hear from you.
Excellent. And yeah, absolutely take advantage of like what you can learn from Sade, because I was blown away that you just have to see like, if you ever get to see Sade on stage and like you get to see the audience response, everybody's listening. People that have known you for a long time or people that have never met you before, everybody's response was the same. Like you can see, like with Tony Robbins, that people who already, like where pretty much everybody knows who he is, like they're kind of already primed that it almost doesn't matter what kind of a performance, like it's going to be great, but it wouldn't almost matter what kind of performance he gave. The work has already been done. But for people that, they're already primed because they already know who you are, they'll love what you're talking about. But even the people just tuning in now, like finding out who you are, I absolutely like, I recommend that like you check out like anything Sade has to offer you, because it's different. Like it struck me as different. It's not just optimism telling people just to be happier. This is practical stuff as to how to move forward.
Thank you, Scott.
Alrighty. So thank you so much for being a part of this interview. It's great. And I hope, depending on schedules and stuff, that we can maybe do some more, which would be
absolutely awesome. A follow-up would be great. I've had such a good time. I always enjoy talking to you. There's so much insight and we bounce off each other with all these ideas. Honestly, we could be here for days, but it's been an honor. Thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, thank you so much. Alrighty, I'll see you on the next one. And guys, hit the link. Excellent. All right, cool. I'll stop there.
That was a long one. We did good.
It was. It just.
But you know what? It was perfect in terms of like just bringing in so many insights and thoughts, and yeah, really, really. I can't wait to actually see what you do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to stop the recording.
Oh, sorry. Were you getting that as well? Yeah.